Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world that smells faintly of damp stone, candle wax and warm milk. You're not standing in your kitchen, but in a 12th century monastery somewhere in the hills of Burgundy. The air is heavy with quiet prayers and, surprisingly, the scent of cheese. You might think you could survive here, but honestly, without Wi-Fi, coffee or memes, you wouldn't last a single Vespers bell. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle through the cloister, the stones cold under your bare feet. The arches above you echo with the distant hum of Gregorian chant, not sung, just breathed. A faint trail of steam curls from a nearby doorway. You follow it nose first, because something in that scent feels alive, warm, and somehow holy. Inside, 3 monks are stirring large copper cauldrons filled with milk. Their robes move like sails in slow motion. You can hear the milk whisper as it begins to thicken, forming delicate curds under their patient watch. It isn't cooking exactly. It's devotion in motion. The oldest monk, Brother Allard, though no one ever calls him by name, lifts a wooden paddle and scoops out a chunk of curd, its pale skin trembling like newborn light. He nods toward you, smiling with the sort of quiet pride someone reserves for miracles that don't need witnesses. Time and silence, his eyes seem to say, that's all it takes. You don't dare break the hush with words. For them, cheese isn't just food. It's theology. Every monastery in medieval Europe needed self-sufficiency. Farming, brewing, writing manuscripts, and yes, turning milk into something that could last through long winters. But here's the odd thing. While others saw cheese as survival, monks saw it as sanctification. They called it Cassius Sanctus, holy cheese. The act of transforming something fleeting like milk into something enduring was seen as a reflection of divine grace itself. You can't help thinking, if they had Instagram, their reels would just be slow, aesthetic shots of curds being cut, captioned, blessed. Outside, bells mark the passage of another hour. In this world, time isn't rushed. It drips. One note at a time, like whey through linen. You lean against a wooden beam and watch as the monks work in rhythm with the silence. The room smells of cream and straw, a perfume that could lull anyone to sleep. One of them, a younger brother with red cheeks, hums softly. You catch a few Latin words that sound suspiciously like a love song, only it's for cheese. The church's strict fasting rules forbade meat for many days of the year. But milk products? That was a gray area. Some monks argued that cheese didn't count as animal flesh. Technically, it was a transformation, not a sin. The loophole became their salvation. Imagine an age where theological debates could hinge on curd texture. Some historians still argue about whether this was genuine devotion or clever gastronomy disguised as piety. Either way, the result was the same. Monastic Europe slowly filled with the smell of ripening wheels tucked away behind thick stone walls. You hear Brother Allard mutter a prayer as he sprinkles salt across the soft curds. Each grain disappears into the surface like snow melting into spring water. He's blessing it, you realize. This isn't seasoning, it's sacrament. The monks believe that preservation is an act of faith, not just chemistry. Salt keeps corruption at bay, both physical and spiritual. In a world without refrigerators, that made sense. In your world, it sounds like poetry. As the curds firm up, the monks lift them into woven molds, pressing out the whey with slow precision. Every movement feels rehearsed, ancient. There's a rhythm in the sound. Drip, squeeze, breathe, that could almost rock you to sleep. You wonder how many centuries of hands have repeated this same pattern. Maybe the air itself remembers. One monk chuckles softly as a chunk slips from his grasp and splashes into the vat. The others smirk, and for a second, the room feels alive with quiet laughter. It's oddly comforting. Even devotion, it seems, allows for clumsy moments. You grin. If there's a heaven, surely it smells like this. Warm, faintly sour, touched by human imperfection. Outside, the night stretches longer. The hills cradle the monastery in darkness. Candles flicker against the rough walls, their light pooling around you like honey. You realize you've been breathing in rhythm with the monks. Each inhale tastes faintly of milk and incense. Cheese to them isn't just sustenance. It's a metaphor for transformation, for patience, endurance, and silent faith. Just as milk turns solid only through time and gentle care, the human soul, they believe, thickens into wisdom through waiting and stillness. That's why their days are measured not by excitement, but by repetition. Stir, pray, wait, repeat. Somewhere beyond the cloister, an owl hoots, a reminder that the world outside still moves on, chaotic and hungry. Here, though, time has folded in on itself. You can almost feel the medieval quiet pressing gently against your temples. It's heavy, like a warm blanket woven from centuries of routine. You spot a row of wooden shelves at the back of the chamber. Round shapes line them, each wrapped in cloth, resting like sleeping moons. The smell is sharp now, earthy, nutty, alive. The monks bow slightly as they pass the shelf. You realize these aren't just food stores. They're relics of patience. Some wheels have been aging since before the younger monk was born. In the flickering light, they look almost like altars themselves. You reach out, fingertips hovering over a wheel marked with a carved cross. The monk beside you whispers, "That one began during the plague year." His voice sounds both reverent and amused, as if the cheese had survived more confessions than he ever could. You laugh quietly, and he nods as though you've just understood something profound. Maybe you have. The night deepens and the final bell tolls, low, deliberate, echoing through the stone corridors. The monks extinguish their candles, leaving only the faint glow of embers in the hearth. You feel the air shift and cooler now, soaked with calm. The scent of curd still lingers, wrapping around you like a story too long untold. As you leave the chamber, you glance back one last time. The shelves gleam in the firelight, rows upon rows of small miracles in progress. You think about your world. Instant deliveries, microwaves, notifications every few seconds. And suddenly, the idea of waiting months for something to ripen doesn't sound so bad. It sounds human. You step into the cloister again, your footsteps soft on the worn stones. Above you, stars shimmer through the arches. The air carries a trace of milk, incense, and silence, the trinity of monastic life. And somewhere in that stillness, you sense the first whisper of obsession taking root. Not in the monks, but in you. You can almost taste it. The bells begin before dawn, 3 low notes that roll across the misty fields like slow thunder. You wake in the small guest cell the monks offered you, your blanket coarse but warm, the air smelling faintly of beeswax and hay. Through the narrow slit of a window, you see the courtyard glimmer with dew. Somewhere beyond it, cows are already stirring, their breath rising in clouds. You can almost taste the chill on your tongue, that strange sweetness of morning milk before the world fully wakes. You follow the sound of the bells to the refectory. It's quiet, not just the kind of quiet you hear, but the kind that hums in your bones. Rows of monks sit with their hands folded, eyes lowered. Breakfast, it turns out, is an act of discipline here. No chatter, no clinking of bowls. Only the scrape of wooden spoons and the steady rhythm of breathing. On the table before you sits a small loaf of bread, a cup of watered wine, and a wedge of pale, soft cheese. You hesitate. This simple meal seems too humble, too bare. But for them, this is abundance. The Rule of Saint Benedict, the sacred guidebook for monastic life, forbade meat except for the sick and the frail. Flesh was temptation, indulgence, appetite unbound. But milk? Milk was another matter entirely. You take a bite, and the cheese yields softly, like butter melting in prayer. One of the brothers glances up at you and smiles faintly, as though you've just discovered a loophole centuries in the making. And in a sense you have. When Benedict wrote his rule in the 6th century, he could never have imagined how monks in later generations would interpret it. "Abstain from the flesh of 4-footed animals," he said. Simple enough, until you realize cows are also 4-footed animals. The monks, ever resourceful, decided that since milk was a product, not flesh, it didn't count. Cheese, butter, cream, all safely holy. You can almost hear the heavenly sighs of relief. The younger monks you met last night file in with copper, jugs pouring fresh milk into clay cups for those who still work the dairies. The smell is thick, almost floral. It fills the refectory, seeping into your hair, your clothes, even your thoughts. It's funny. You never imagined faith could smell like breakfast. A parchment pinned near the door lists fasting days. There are a lot of them. More than 200 in a year, in fact. Imagine trying to live through that. No meat, no indulgence, no little snack between prayers. You'd probably start dreaming about cheeseburgers by week 2, but here, fasting isn't punishment. It's purification. The monks believe the body's restraint sharpens the soul. Still, even saints get hungry, so they leaned on milk. It was the perfect compromise, nourishing, plentiful, and importantly, spiritually ambiguous. Some monasteries even had herds specifically bred for the quality of their milk, not their meat. You can almost picture a monk in sandals debating the theological implications of butterfat content. Some historians still argue whether the church secretly encouraged this dairy dependency or simply turned a blind eye. Either way, monasteries became the first great cheesemakers of Europe. After the meal, the monks rise silently and bow. The abbot leads them in a brief prayer, thanking not just God, but the cows, the patient beasts who give us life. The words sound strange to your ears, but not to theirs. To them, gratitude was the bridge between work and worship. You remember something Brother Allard said the night before. We do not take milk, we receive it. You step outside into the morning light. The cows are grazing quietly in the far meadow, tails flicking lazily. A novice monk, barely 20, freckles bright against the cold, guides them with a soft bell. He waves when he sees you and gestures for you to follow. The monastery's dairy lies behind a low stone wall, half covered in moss. Inside, you find rows of wooden tubs filled with milk, still warm from milking. Steam curls off them like incense. The novice begins to chant softly, a tune you can't place, rhythmic and hypnotic. You realize it's not a hymn, it's timing. The chant keeps the stirring even, steady. Each note is a measure, each pause a reminder to breathe. The air here feels different, thick with purpose. You can smell the faint sourness of yesterday's curds, the sharp tang of salt drying on boards. It's beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with art or architecture. It's the beauty of repetition, the comfort of doing the same thing every morning until your body remembers the prayer for you. As the novice stirs, he tells you that some monks believe milk represents divine potential, pure but incomplete, waiting for transformation. Cheese, then, is the fulfilled form, the patient evolution of grace. You find yourself smiling. In your world, milk expires in a week. Here it ripens into eternity. He laughs when you tell him that, a soft, breathy sound. The Lord rewards patience, he says, and sometimes that patience tastes like cheddar. You both laugh quietly. The cows outside moo as if in agreement. Later that day in the scriptorium, you see monks writing by candlelight, copying texts on theology, medicine, and agriculture. In one manuscript you spot an illustration, a cow, drawn with a halo, standing beside a monk holding a wheel of cheese like an offering. You blink, wondering if it's a joke. But the margins are filled with Latin annotations about the sanctity of milk and the virtue of simplicity. They meant it. Entire pages of sacred reflection on curds. The abbot passes behind you, glancing at the page. God reveals himself in the ordinary, he murmurs, even in breakfast. As the day fades, you join the monks again for evening prayers. The air in the chapel is cool and still. Candles flicker on the stone altar, their flames bending gently as though bowing to the hymns. You notice that every monk before kneeling makes the sign of the cross, not with oil, but with a drop of milk from a small vessel near the door. It's symbolic, you're told, purity renewed. Outside, the sky burns gold over the fields. The cows return to their stalls lowing softly. The same cycle will repeat tomorrow, and the next day and the next. 1,000 mornings of stirring, praying, waiting. You think about how these men, isolated from the world, built entire economies of cheese without meaning to. They didn't invent for profit. They simply perfected survival. And in doing so, they shaped taste itself. The rule of Saint Benedict was meant to tame desire, yet here it quietly fed one. Not for wealth or indulgence, but for transformation, for the subtle joy of making something endure. The bell rings again, slow, deep, eternal. You close your eyes. Somewhere the faint scent of milk drifts in from the courtyard. It's warm, ancient, and patient. And as the sound fades into silence, you realize this is how obsession begins. The stairs spiral downward, lit by a trembling lantern that makes every shadow sway like it's breathing. The air grows cooler with each step, until your skin prickles and your breath turns visible. Beneath the monastery, under layers of stone and silence, lies the place they don't show pilgrims, the heart of their devotion, their secret cellar. You've been granted permission by Brother Allard himself, though he only said, "Be still and watch," which here feels less like advice and more like a vow. When the door creaks open, the scent hits you first, sharp, nutty, alive. It's not unpleasant, just ancient, the kind of smell that tells stories before anyone speaks. The light reveals rows of wheels resting on wooden planks, their rinds dimpled, dusted with a white bloom of age. It looks like a room full of moons caught mid-rise. The monks step in quietly, their sandals soft on the dirt floor. No one talks, not even the novice with freckles. Every sound, a droplet from the ceiling, a faint shift of wood, feels sacred. Brother Allard sets down the lantern on a low stone ledge. The flame dances across the cheese wheels, making them gleam like relics. This, he finally says, his voice as soft as wool, is where time prays with us. You smile at the phrase, though he isn't joking. Each wheel is marked, some with a cross, others with simple numbers. One has a Latin phrase scratched into the rind, Deo gratias, thanks be to God. You run your finger lightly over it. The surface feels rough, almost alive under the thin film of dust. The cellar isn't just storage, it's a living archive. Each cheese ripens slowly, breathing through its rind, transforming month after month. The monks call it the second fermentation of faith. The first, they say, happens in the heart. In the far corner, two monks are tending to the shelves. One turns each wheel with deliberate care. The other brushes the surface with a stiff boarhair broom. The motion is slow, rhythmic, almost like the swing of a censer in Mass. We turn them every few days, Brother Allard explains, so they grow evenly. Neglect even a single turn and mold takes hold. You nod. It sounds a lot like life. He laughs softly. Indeed, cheese teaches patience. Pride spoils faster than milk, you chuckle. That's one of those lines that belongs on a monk's t-shirt, if monks wore t-shirts. The cellar is divided into seasons, sections for spring milk, summer milk, autumn. Each batch carries the flavor of its time. Herbs from the meadow, flowers from the fields, smoke from distant fires. You can taste history in each one, literally. The monks learned long ago that not all milk behaves the same. In summer, cows graze on wildflowers. In winter, on dry hay. The difference shows in the cheese, color, scent, texture. Over centuries, they refined this accidental art into precise ritual. To them, the hand of God was in every curd's shift, every crack in the rind. Brother Allard leads you deeper, where the walls sweat faintly with condensation. Here, the oldest wheels sleep, years old, maybe decades. Their surfaces are dark, almost stone-like. He gestures reverently. These are from the plague years, he says, when half our brothers were gone. We made them anyway, to remember the living. You lower your voice instinctively. Do you still eat them? He smiles. Sometimes. But mostly we listen to them. You blink. Listen? He nods. When we tap them with the handle of a spoon, we can hear how they breathe. A hollow sound means peace. A tight one means unrest. You laugh quietly. So, cheese meditates. Perhaps, he says, eyes twinkling. Perhaps it simply waits better than we do. He hands you a small knife and motions toward a wheel near the entrance. Fresh, pale, still soft. Try, he says. You kneel, cutting gently into the rind. The knife sinks easily, releasing a scent both grassy and warm. You take a sliver between your fingers. It's smooth, cool, a little elastic. The first bite surprises you. Mild at first, then tangy, then suddenly sweet, like the aftertaste of candle smoke and honey. Each bite, Allard murmurs, is the sound of silence learning to sing. You nod slowly. You get it. At least you think you do. The cellar feels suspended outside of time. You can't tell how long you've been down here. The monks work wordlessly, as if their bodies remember what their minds no longer need to. The rhythm of turning, brushing, waiting, it becomes hypnotic. You feel the same drowsy peace as when rain taps on a window at night. You glance around and notice faint markings on the wall. Tiny crosses, tally marks, even a small sketch of a cow scratched into the stone. Generations of monks leaving whispers behind. You imagine one centuries ago, sneaking down here to escape the noise of prayer. finding a different kind of meditation in the smell of aging curds. There's something intimate about it all. Not indulgent, not greedy, and just human. Cheese here isn't luxury. It's a way to understand time, decay, patience. Brother Allard catches you staring and says, almost as if reading your thoughts, "We tend to souls as we tend to cheese, with quiet hands and steady hearts." Outside, thunder rolls faintly in the distance. The air in the cellar seems to hum. A drop of water lands on your wrist, cold, startling. You realize hours have passed. Before you leave, Allard stops by a small alcove. There, under a white cloth, sits a wheel different from the rest, smaller, wrapped in wax, sealed with red thread. He doesn't explain, just whispers, "For feast days." You wonder what it tastes like, but something tells you. Some mysteries are meant to stay waiting. As you ascend the stairs, the air warms, filling again with the earthy smell of straw and rain. You glance back one last time. The lantern light glows against the stone like a heartbeat, flickering softly around the sleeping wheels. You think of the phrase he used earlier, where time prays with us, and for a moment, you believe it. Because in that quiet, dark cellar, even milk learns to become eternal. And as the door closes behind you, the faint scent of aging curds follows, a ghost of patience lingering in your lungs. You keep walking through that endless corridor of stone, still carrying the faint scent of milk on your hands. The monk's world has started to make a strange kind of sense to you now. A rhythm of silence, patience, and steady stirring. But tonight something feels different. The air buzzes softly with talk of trade, of travelers waiting outside the gates, and of small wheels of cheese wrapped like treasure. You realize something remarkable. The monk's obsession has escaped the walls. It started slowly, the way moss takes root on cold stone. Their pilgrim, weary from weeks on the road, would trade a candle or a loaf of bread for a bit of cheese. A simple exchange. But when he returned home, he spoke of its flavor with the same reverence one might reserve for relics. He said it tasted of prayer, of patience, of time itself. Word spread, as words always do, faster than carts, faster than plague. And suddenly, what began as a humble food for fasting days became a quiet revolution in taste. Outside the monastery, farmers began to imitate the monks' recipes. They bartered curds and wheels, added herbs from their fields, and created names that still whisper through Europe's markets today. Cheddar, brie, gouda. You can almost hear them, can't you? The sound of knives slicing through soft rinds, the laughter of merchants counting coins. Cheese had become currency, and the monks, perhaps unknowingly, had become its bankers. 1 cartload of cheese could buy you a plot of land. 2, a horse. 3, maybe the silence of a lord. People called it white gold. Not just for its color, but for its promise, that time, when cared for properly, could be turned into something that didn't rot, didn't fade, something that improved the longer you waited. The monks had invented patience as a commodity. You imagine yourself walking through a medieval fair. The air smells of hay, iron, and smoke. But over everything, that one scent, warm, nutty, a little sharp, cuts through the crowd. You see stalls piled high with wheels, round as suns, stamped with marks of abbeys long gone. A monk stands quietly behind his cart, counting nothing, saying nothing. His hands tell the story instead. The slow rotation of the cheese, the gentle press of thumb against rind. You think, if money could breathe, this is what it would smell like. Some say this was the first economy truly built on trust. After all, no one could eat a whole wheel in a day. A cheesemaker had to believe his buyer would return. A trader had to believe time would do its work. And buyers had to believe the monks had not cheated the curd. Trust to that invisible flavor held the market together. Even kings respected it. When they taxed the villages, they accepted cheese in place of coin. Whole vaults were lined with it, soft and shining like a treasury of moons. Yet the monks themselves seemed untouched by greed. To them, the value wasn't gold or trade. It was transformation, the alchemy of milk, salt, and patience, a faith that something as fragile as cream could endure the centuries. While merchants argued and nobles feasted, the brothers still returned to their cellars, still turned their wheels by candlelight, still whispered blessings over curds. One chronicler from Burgundy wrote that the air inside those cellars was thick with holiness. He wasn't wrong. You picture that space, dim, cool, the air damp as breath. The cheese wheels stacked like sleeping giants. each one humming quietly, expanding, settling, ripening, and you, standing among them, feel the weight of history pressing softly on your shoulders. You touch one of the wheels. Its rind is rough but warm. Somewhere beneath the crust, you can hear tiny pockets of life, bacteria at work, transforming milk into memory. It's strange but comforting. You think of how your own life ferments too, how your days left in the quiet might ripen into something richer. The monks never called it business. They called it devotion. To make something that endures, they believed, was a form of prayer. And perhaps they were right. Cheese connected their solitude to the wider world, a letter from silence to noise sealed in wax and time. By the 13th century, entire regions were known for their monastery cheese. In England, Cistercian abbeys grew rich from it. In France, their products graced royal tables. In a few towns, cheese became so valuable that it replaced silver for paying rent. One chronicler joked that peasants feared more for a stolen cheese than a stolen cow. Another claimed a monk once tried to bribe a tax collector. With a slice so perfect, the man forgot the number he came to write. You can't help but smile. The idea that an entire economy could be scented with butterfat feels absurd, and yet so perfectly human. History is rarely built on grand speeches or battles alone. More often, it's built on what people can eat, trade, or wait for. And here, in this soft, patient creation, the Middle Ages found its quiet fortune. Outside the abbey, the moon hangs low, the same pale color as the cheese wheels in the cellar. You think of all the hands that have shaped milk into permanence, all the breaths held during fermentation, all the candles burned down to stubs, and you realize somewhere between hunger and holiness, the monks had found their miracle, to make time taste like peace. You exhale. The scent of earth, straw, and ripened milk lingers in your nose. Somewhere a bell tolls for evening prayer. You close your eyes and for a moment, you imagine you can hear the slow turning of cheese in the dark, the heartbeat of an economy that never sought to be one. And as the sound fades, you wonder, maybe wealth was never meant to glitter. Maybe, just maybe, it was always meant to soften. The next morning feels heavier somehow, the kind of stillness that hides invention. You follow the smell of the cellars again, only this time it's different, stronger, stranger. You wrinkle your nose, half curious, half alarmed. Whatever the monks are making down there, it doesn't smell like the holy kind of work anymore. You step inside the cool gloom and see rows upon rows of cheeses, each resting like a silent sermon. But in one corner, that's where it happens. A young monk is bent over a wheel that looks almost blue, streaked with veins like marble. He glances up, startled to see you. Then a small, guilty smile. "Not all gifts of God smell sweet," he whispers, and laughs the way only someone who's been awake too long can laugh. You've just met the first maker of what will one day be called Roquefort. A cheese born from mold, from accident, from the courage to wait and see if ruin could turn sacred. It began innocently enough. A monk left his curds too close to damp bread. Days later, when he lifted the cloth, he found blue veins threading through the paste like lightning caught in milk. Most would have thrown it away, but not him. He tasted it. You can almost see his face twist, then soften, then light up in wonder. He realized decay could be beautiful. From that moment on, rules bent, gently but inevitably. Some monks began experimenting in secret, aging cheese in caves, rubbing herbs on rinds, washing curds with ale or wine. They called it the flavor of forgiveness, a way to embrace imperfection, to turn mistakes into miracles. You watch as they lower baskets into shadowed caverns beneath the abbey, where the air moves like a living creature. The smell down there is sharp, intoxicating. You cough once, then again, before it settles into something oddly comforting, earthy, pungent, like the breath of the mountain itself. The cheeses sit in silence, growing freckles of green and white, each spot a fingerprint of time. The monks don't speak much as they work. You hear the soft scrape of wooden paddles, the low hum of prayer. Their rhythm never breaks. Stir, drain, press, wait. Stir, drain, press, wait. Over and over, like heartbeat and breath, you start to realize that patience for them isn't a virtue. It's survival. Sometimes, late at night, one of them sneaks back to the cellar with a candle stub, just to check if the mold has taken shape. They talk to the cheese as though it might answer. "Are you sleeping well, my child?" One mutters. Another murmurs, "You've become quite fragrant tonight." You bite your lip to keep from laughing, because honestly, who talks to their dinner? And yet you understand. The work feels alive, almost sacred. As word spreads of these forbidden flavors, the church grows uneasy. Some bishops frown upon the idea that rot could produce anything holy. A few monasteries are reprimanded. One abbot is even ordered to burn his entire stock. But others defend it fiercely. God made mold, one monk argues, and he made taste buds to enjoy it. The debate gets heated, quite literally. In some kitchens, they start smoking the cheese, hiding the blue inside browned rinds so no outsider can tell. A rebellion wrapped in wax. You find yourself grinning in the candlelight, imagining these quiet men of prayer acting like culinary outlaws, smuggling flavor under the noses of bishops. And the thing is, people love it. Nobles crave it. Traders carry it across borders in secret carts. At one point, a French knight is said to have offered an entire barrel of wine for a single wheel of the blue monk cheese. Some say he even kissed the monk's hand. Others whisper he proposed. History doesn't confirm either. The historians, as usual, still argue about that. You notice something curious. The monks never seem proud. They just keep experimenting. A little more salt. A different cave. A slower turn. Some cheeses come out heavenly, others, well, let's just say the monastery chickens eat well. One monk jokes that even the devil wouldn't steal their mistakes. You can't help but laugh, and the sound echoes strangely against the stones, soft and warm. One afternoon you sit beside an older brother who's brushing a rind with honey and wine. His hands are steady, the same hands that pray every dawn. You ask him why he keeps doing this, risking scolding, wasting milk. He smiles without looking up. Because, he says, creation was never tidy. You realize then that this was never about taste alone. It was about faith, not in God but in transformation. The monks were teaching themselves to love the uncertain, to find grace in rot, to see holiness in what most would throw away. When the wind shifts, the scent of the cellar rises into the chapel above. The choir pauses mid-hymn. For a moment you could swear the notes themselves smell faintly of fungus and hope. It's absurd, yes, and somehow perfect. By the time evening falls, the moldy cheeses have multiplied. Each one carries a different hue, a different secret. You watch the candlelight flicker across their surfaces and think of constellations, a galaxy of edible stars. The monks move among them like quiet astronomers, charting the heavens in scent and texture, and as you turn to leave, the air clings to your robe, a mix of earth, salt, and something wild. You realize you've grown fond of it. This strange perfume of imperfection. Up in the refectory, someone cracks a joke about how heaven probably smells like this. Another monk replies, "If heaven smells like this, it'll clear the place in 5 minutes." Everyone laughs, the kind of laughter that feels earned. Outside, night settles over the monastery. You step into the cool air, still smiling. The stars above look like holes poked in cheesecloth. You think maybe the universe too was once a happy accident. A divine mold spreading through time, and as you breathe in the quiet, you begin to understand the monk's secret. Perfection doesn't come from control. It comes from letting go. You can still hear the creak of wagon wheels on damp cobblestone, merchants passing under a grey dawn, their carts piled high not just with spices and silk, but with Europe's other treasure, cheese. Wrapped in linen, breathing faintly through the fabric, it carried the smell of pasture and patience. To touch it was to hold a piece of land, a bit of time and a promise that flavor could outlast the season. In the markets of Italy, wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano stood like monuments, each stamped with the mark of a duke, each guarded like silver. One wheel could be worth a warhorse, and in lean years farmers sometimes paid their taxes in cheese. Strange, isn't it? That something born from milk and bacteria could weigh as much in value as gold. But cheese was the currency of the countryside. It didn't rust, it didn't spoil, and it carried the sun of summer deep into the cold months. Historians still debate whether the 14th century truly deserved the title the Age of Cheese, but one thing is certain, never before had flavor been tied so tightly to power. Across the continent, cheese became language, a way to say who you were and where you came from. In France, Roquefort was protected by royal decree. In England, cheddar was sealed behind castle walls. In the Swiss Alps, herders buried their rounds in frozen caves, trusting the mountain itself to guard them. And yet, in the quiet halls of monasteries, the monks kept stirring their vats. The same hands that once turned pages of prayer books now turned wheels of curd. They were still making cheese for God, but now kings, lords, and merchants waited in line. You can almost picture it, a golden crown leaning down over a wooden table, eager to taste what a barefoot monk had made in silence. There's a story, half legend, half memory, that Charlemagne himself once stopped at a small monastery in the Jura Mountains. There a monk served him a slice of cheese streaked with blue veins, soft and salty as tears. The king was astonished. He ordered it sent back to his palace, and just like that, the food of poverty became the flavor of royalty. You can almost hear the knife cutting through that crust. A clean, sharp sound, like a door closing between two worlds. From that moment on, cheese traveled upward, from cloister to court, from prayer to profit. What had begun as devotion was now a matter of prestige. A noble's reputation could rise or fall with the taste of his table. A man's virtue, one courtier once wrote, can be measured by the cheese he serves. Pretentious? Maybe. But they believed it. And yet the age of splendor could not last. War, plague, and famine swept through Europe, and with them came silence. The Black Death emptied pastures, abandoned abbeys, and left the smell of milk to rot in the air. The craft nearly vanished, save for a few isolated valleys where monks kept the flame alive, stirring in secret, whispering the old prayers as they watched the curd thicken. Picture it, a single monk in a stone cellar, his breath visible in the cold, turning a wooden spoon slowly through the milk. Outside, the world burns and collapses. Inside, time holds its breath. The world changes, but his rhythm doesn't. When peace finally returned, the world was hungry again. Hungry not just for food, but for trade. Cheese resurfaced, but this time it spoke the language of merchants, not of saints. It rolled down mountain roads, across harbors, onto ships bound for distant shores. Cheese had escaped the monastery. It had crossed the threshold from faith to fortune. And in its aroma, that deep, nutty, impossible blend of salt and patience, lingered a quiet echo of what it once was. A prayer turned into nourishment, a devotion made edible. You can almost feel it now, the world shifting beneath your feet. The soft echo of bells from the abbeys fades, replaced by the hiss of steam and the clang of metal. The 19th century arrives not like a sunrise, but like a factory whistle. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the monks are no longer the keepers of milk's secrets. The machines are. You step into a world that smells not of hay and wood smoke, but of iron and oil. The cows are still there, but the rhythm has changed. The hand that once stirred curd now tightens bolts. The small wooden vat has grown into a gleaming cauldron of brass, and the prayer-like patience of the monastery has been replaced by the clock. Every minute must count, every wheel must match the next. The world has discovered efficiency, and efficiency, as you'll soon see, has a strange way of stealing magic. In 1851, a dairyman named Jesse Williams in New York State built what people now call the first cheese factory. It wasn't grand, just a barn with pipes and a hint of steam, but it broke the ancient spell. Farmers delivered milk by wagon, and what had once been the labor of faith became a system. No one prayed over the curds anymore. They followed instructions, timed and measured to the second. It worked. Cheese multiplied. Profit rose. And yet something invisible, something human, slipped quietly out the door. Across the ocean, the same rhythm took hold. In England, in Switzerland, in the valleys of France, cheese was standardized. The same round of cheddar could now be sold in London, Paris, or Amsterdam, and taste almost identical. Pasteur's discoveries made it possible. The invisible microbes that monks once called God's breath were now mapped, studied, and controlled. It was an age of revelation, but also of restraint. The mystery of milk had been tamed, and like all things tamed, it lost a bit of its wild beauty. Still, in the high alpine caves, a few stubborn hands refused to obey. You can almost see them, weathered men in wool coats brushing and turning great wheels of Gruyere or Comté by hand. They talk to the cheese as if it's alive, whispering nonsense or blessings under their breath. Maybe they're mad, or maybe they know that flavor, real flavor, needs a touch of madness. Machines don't have that. Machines don't love. Historians still debate whether industrialization saved or spoiled cheese. It fed more mouths than ever before, but it also silenced 1,000 tiny dialects of taste. The language of meadows, of cows eating herbs no one could name, of monks who aged their wheels to the rhythm of their own prayers. You might say it was progress, or you might say it was forgetfulness, but the truth is never that clean. For every machine that stamped out uniform rounds, there was someone who hid a bit of the old way inside, a starter culture carried in a pocket, a recipe scribbled in the margin of a Bible, a cellar kept just dark enough to breed imperfection. In the shadows of factories, the old art learned to disguise itself, to survive quietly like an outlaw religion. And in that silence, the soul of cheese endured. You can almost taste it even now, that faint wildness, that earthy hum beneath the polish. It's the echo of the monks, whispering through time. The world may have traded their cloisters for conveyor belts, their patience for productivity, but their devotion never fully disappeared. It merely changed its disguise. You lean back for a moment, imagining the hum of those first machines mixing with the hum of bees in a meadow. Two kinds of industry, one mechanical, one natural. Somewhere between them lies the truth. Cheese was no longer just food, nor prayer, nor profit. It was a story. The story of how humans tried to perfect something that was already perfect enough. And as you let that thought linger, you can almost smell the faint sweetness of milk warming in a copper vat, a soundless reminder that even in the age of steel, something ancient still stirs. You open your eyes to the 20th century, not to the sound of monks or machines, but to the soft hum of refrigerators, cold light, humming metal, and the easy comfort of milk that never spoils. For the first time in human history, cheese is everywhere. Sliced, wrapped, boxed, branded. Here it no longer whispers of pastures or patience. It smiles at you from a supermarket shelf, neat and convenient like everything else in the modern dream. You reach for it without thinking. A rectangle of cheddar, smooth and shiny. A triangle of processed Swiss with holes too perfect to be real. It's cheese, yes, but also not quite. Somewhere between invention and imitation, the soul of the craft has been dressed up for mass appeal. And yet behind all that packaging, there's something strange stirring. A hunger not for more, but for meaning. After the World Wars, Europe was rebuilding, brick by brick, and flavor by flavor. Factories fed the masses, but memories fed the heart. And memory, as you've learned by now, always smells faintly of milk and time. People began to crave the old tastes again. The rustic, uneven, slightly wild flavors that reminded them of something lost. Cheese, of all things, became a symbol of authenticity. It was no longer just food. It was identity pressed into rind and salt. In France, the government created Appellation d'origine contrôlée, the AOC system, to protect traditional foods from imitation. Roquefort, Comté, Brie de Meaux, Camembert. Each name became sacred, bound to the soil, the cows, the grass, the hands that shaped it. A wheel of cheese could now carry a passport, a heritage, a claim to truth. In a world that mass-produced almost everything, cheese became a rare kind of honesty. Across the Alps in Switzerland, herders still walked their cows up the mountains every summer, chasing the high grass. You can imagine it, the soft bells around the cows' necks, the echo of their steps on the slope, and the air so pure it hums in your chest. The milk they brought back wasn't just milk. It was sunlight turned solid. Each wheel they made held the echo of those pastures. People would pay fortunes for that echo. In England and America, something new began, a rebellion small at first, led by quiet dreamers. Young cheesemakers, tired of factories, went searching for forgotten recipes. They found them in old journals, in dusty monasteries, in the memories of shepherds who'd almost given up. They brought back the slow rhythms, the wooden spoons, the cloth-bound wheels, the cellars that smelled like caves after rain. Cheese became art again, imperfect, handmade, alive. Historians still argue about when the so-called artisanal revival began. Some say the 1970s, when food stopped being about survival and started being about story. Others trace it to the 1950s, when French films and travel books made the old world seem romantic. But maybe it was always waiting, a quiet yearning tucked inside us for the taste of something that takes time, something that asks you to wait, to trust decay, to believe that rot can turn to richness if you're patient enough. You smile, because the monks would have understood that. For them, patience wasn't inconvenience, it was faith. And now, centuries later, we find ourselves returning to that same slow devotion, though we give it prettier names: organic, artisanal, farm to table. We pay extra for what once was ordinary. We treat cheese like treasure, though our ancestors would have traded it for bread without blinking. It's funny, isn't it? The same world that invented instant coffee now obsesses over 12-month-aged cheddar. We put Wi-Fi in our fridges but romanticize caves. We scroll through glowing screens showing wheels of cheese we'll never taste. In a way, we've turned nostalgia into luxury, the taste of the past, sold by the ounce, and yet, when you sit down at night, maybe with a small slice of something sharp and crumbly, you realize it's not really about indulgence. It's about connection. You can almost hear the echo of those monks stirring their vats, the faint drip of whey on stone floors, the quiet hum of prayers turned into flavor. Every bite carries centuries. Every crumb is a small rebellion against hurry. You take a breath and think of how strange it is that all of human progress, from plow to factory to fridge, has only made us long for slowness again. Cheese, of all things, has become the symbol of patience in a restless world. The monks might laugh at us for paying premium prices to feel humble again. But maybe they'd also nod, understanding that we've finally remembered what they always knew. That the sacred can live in the ordinary if you give it time. The lights around you dim a little. The hum of the refrigerator softens. You can almost smell the damp earth of a cellar, even though you're miles away from one. Somewhere in a dark room lined with wheels of aging cheese, a man still walks with a small brush and a quiet heart, checking his rounds, whispering the same promise that has lasted 1,000 years. Be patient. The flavor is coming, and you, listening now, find comfort in that thought, that some things, no matter how modern the world becomes, still refuse to be rushed. If you listen closely to the past, there's a second song beneath the monks' chants, softer, older, and almost lost. It's the rhythm of hands that worked without praise, shaping milk into memory while the world looked elsewhere. Long before the abbeys perfected their recipes, long before any guild or government stamped its seal on flavor, it was women who kept the craft alive. In the fields, in cottages, in small damp rooms that smelled of straw and smoke, women stirred the first curds of civilization. They had no ledgers, no Latin prayers, no parchment to record their art. But they had rhythm, the kind learned from birth and passed by gesture rather than word. They knew when the milk was ready by sound, by scent, by the way the surface quivered under a wooden spoon. It was intuition, not instruction. In medieval Europe, when monks wrote about their cheese-making, they wrote as if the idea had begun with them. But history, as it often does, forgot the quiet hands that taught them first. Before monasteries rose from stone, there were women milking goats in the dawn, hanging curds in linen and pressing wheels under rocks by the fire. They made cheese not for markets but for survival. They didn't age it in vaulted cellars. They dried it by the window, salted it with care, and prayed it would last the winter. They were mothers, shepherdesses, and healers, keepers of milk and silence. Some historians call them the invisible artisans of the Middle Ages. They didn't sign their work, but their touch shaped generations. And though the monks would later refine, record, and commercialize the process, what they inherited was women's intuition turned into method. The abbeys didn't invent patience. They learned it from the women who had no choice but to wait. Picture this: a woman alone at dusk pouring warm milk into a clay bowl. The air hums with insects. The fields glow with the last light. Her children sleep nearby. The fire crackles low. She stirs slowly, watching the milk thicken, whispering to herself, not prayers exactly, but the kind of words you say when the world depends on small miracles. She doesn't know she's part of a 1,000-year tradition. She just knows the milk must not spoil, that it must become something that lasts. Centuries later, when monks perfected their brined wheels and market cheeses, they wrote about rennet, aging, fermentation, but never about intuition. Never about those quiet nights in which knowledge passed hand to hand, not pen to paper. They recorded temperatures, weights, and rituals, but they forgot the pulse of life that came before calculation. The soft hum of instinct, the patience that smells like home, and then, as Europe modernized, even that memory faded. Industrialization took the craft from the hands of women again. Factories replaced firesides, recipes replaced rhythms. The women who had carried flavor through famine and plague became workers in white coats, their touch replaced by thermometers. History rarely noticed the difference, but taste did. It always does. Yet in hidden corners of the world, the old ways persisted, often quietly, stubbornly, like wild herbs growing through cracks in the stone. In the French Alps, in the Scottish Highlands, in the hills of Tuscany and the meadows of Poland, women still made cheese the old way. They called it by names that never appeared in books: Sir, Kashar, Brinza, Quark, Paneer. Every culture, every region had its version of this sacred patience. And everywhere it was women who carried it. In Greece, grandmothers still woke before sunrise to make feta, humming songs older than writing. In northern Italy, mothers handed down the family starter cultures, alive for decades, as heirlooms. In rural France, the last shepherdesses of the Pyrenees kept making tomé the way their ancestors did, without machines, without measurements, only trust. They are ghosts now, most of them. But every so often, when you taste something that feels impossibly honest, something that reminds you of grass and smoke and time, you're tasting them. You're tasting the echo of the women who never got credit, but never stopped creating. It's strange to think that cheese, which we now associate with luxury or indulgence, was once women's quiet rebellion against hunger. It was survival turned art. It was love made tangible. When milk threatened to spoil, they transformed it. When time threatened to erase them, they left flavor behind as their signature. Invisible but unforgettable, you realize then that the story of cheese isn't really about monks or merchants, kings or trade. It's about preservation, not just of food but of memory. Each wheel carries a fingerprint, not of the famous but of the forgotten. And maybe that's why the taste lingers long after it's gone. Because you're not just eating, you're remembering. You think of those women stirring their milk under the same moon you see now, the same quiet patience, the same soft hope that the future will remember the things worth keeping. Maybe that's the secret the monks understood too, that devotion and creation are the same act, whether spoken in prayer or silence. In the modern world, as artisans and chefs rediscover lost methods, they unknowingly resurrect these women's whispers. Every handmade wheel of cheese, every raw milk experiment, every return to slow fermentation is a quiet thank you to the hands history forgot, but flavor never did. So next time you cut into a piece of cheese, rustic, uneven, alive, and pause for a moment, listen. Beneath the taste, beneath the salt, beneath the centuries, you can almost hear it, the murmur of women at dusk, stirring, waiting, and believing in transformation. And in that moment, you understand something simple and enormous, that all civilization is built on such hands, patient, invisible, and kind. You've probably never thought of time as something you can taste. But in the medieval world, cheese was time, folded, salted, and sleeping. It was milk transformed by waiting, and the monks who measured their lives in bells and prayers understood that waiting was not a burden. It was a kind of devotion. You imagine standing in one of those cold cellars again, the same chill that breathes out from the walls, the scent of wood smoke and fermentation. The air feels alive, trembling with the slow work of invisible life. On each wooden shelf, round bodies of cheese sit like monks in meditation, silent, patient, and slowly becoming something more than they were. There's something oddly human about that. We all begin soft and uncertain, and only through time and maybe pressure do we become ourselves. That was the monks' philosophy, even if they never wrote it that way. They saw aging cheese as a metaphor for faith, for transformation, for the belief that what is humble can through patience become holy. You picture one of them, a nameless brother in a damp robe, running his hand across a wheel that's been resting for months. He doesn't think about flavor the way you do. He's not imagining a charcuterie board or a fancy pairing. To him, this is something sacred, the stillness of milk turned eternal. When you cut open an aged cheese, what you're really cutting into is history, a solidified memory of weather, pasture, and waiting. Every wheel carries the echo of the grass eaten by cows that no longer exist, of summers that have already died. You're tasting seasons condensed into something you can hold. That's why no two wheels ever taste the same, even when made side by side. Because time, like memory, refuses to repeat itself perfectly. The monks didn't just learn to accept that, they built an entire spiritual philosophy around it. They called it humilitas temporis, the humility of time. The idea that all good things, divine or earthly, come only through stillness and decay. It's strange comfort, isn't it? That decay can be sacred. That waiting, which in the modern world feels like a curse, was once a form of prayer. You wait not because you're powerless, but because you believe in change. The monks believed in that. And somehow you do too. Some historians still argue whether medieval cheese aging techniques were accidental or deliberate, whether monks understood the science or simply trusted experience. But the truth is softer than that debate. They didn't need to understand why bacteria worked. They just needed to know that it did. It was faith in action, invisible, constant, mysterious. And maybe that's why cheese feels ancient even when it's new, because it's made from waiting, from patience that outlasts reason. There's a legend whispered in food history circles about a monastery in Burgundy where the monks refused to record their cheese recipe, saying it wasn't a recipe at all. "We don't make cheese," they said. "We tend to time." You roll that phrase around in your head, tending to time. There's poetry in it. Maybe the whole world should be more like that, more willing to let things rest, to trust that transformation can happen without control. When cheese ages, the outer rind grows rough and dry, while the inside becomes creamy, fragrant, alive. The monks saw it as proof of spiritual balance, that the soul, like cheese, must protect itself on the outside so that tenderness can survive within. It's funny how food becomes philosophy when you stare at it long enough. In a sense, they were preserving more than milk. They were preserving hope. Because to wait for something to mature is to believe the future will still exist when it's ready. And in the unstable, war-torn centuries of medieval Europe, that was no small act of faith. You can almost see it now. The abbey on a hill, the evening mist, the echo of chanting from the chapel. The cellar doors creak open, and a monk steps into the cold carrying a candle. The flame wavers as he checks the shelves, whispering softly to himself. It's quiet work, almost invisible, yet the world will remember it in flavor long after his name is gone. In modern times, when we slice a piece of aged cheddar or parmesan, we rarely think of monks or history or faith. But every bite still carries that DNA, the discipline of stillness, the patience of fermentation, the trust that time itself can create beauty. If you've ever let something rest in a project, a feeling, a version of yourself, you already know what they knew, that some things are meant to ripen slowly. That rushing only ruins the flavor. Even now, the word affinage, the French term for cheese aging, literally means to bring to perfection. It's not about control, it's about care. The cheesemaker doesn't force the cheese to age. He listens to it, feels it, waits for it to speak back. That's time as dialogue, not domination. You think about your own life, the moments that needed to ripen, the memories that grew sweeter only after they aged. Maybe that's why these stories feel comforting before sleep, because they remind you that waiting isn't wasted. That even when nothing seems to happen, transformation might already be underway. Time doesn't just pass, it seeps, it ferments, it changes everything it touches. And in the stillness of the monks' cellars, that truth was visible, smellable, edible. They didn't just taste cheese, they tasted the flow of existence. There's a saying from an old Cistercian text, "What we preserve preserves us." It meant the food they made to survive ended up shaping their identity. The cheese aged them as much as they aged it. And when you lie here tonight, eyes half closed, maybe you can feel that rhythm too. The slow, invisible work of becoming. The kind that doesn't rush, doesn't panic, doesn't demand applause. The kind that simply waits, you breathe slower. The world fades to a hum, somewhere deep in a cellar of memory. Time is still ripening, still transforming everything soft into something enduring. And maybe that's what the monks were really obsessed with all along. Not cheese, but the taste of forever. You open your eyes to the sound of hooves on cobblestone and the creak of wooden carts. The monasteries haven't changed much, but the world around them has. Kings want gold, merchants want spices, sailors want maps. And somewhere in the middle of all that movement, cheese quietly begins its journey from sacred cellar to global cargo. At first, it seems almost laughable, monks and traders in the same sentence. But they were connected by something invisible, preservation. The merchants preserved wealth. The monks preserved flavor and faith. When long voyages made fresh food impossible, cheese became a miracle, durable, nutritious, and strangely loyal. It could travel for weeks without spoiling, surviving damp holds and shifting climates. In the 12th and 13th centuries, As trade routes blossomed across Europe, wheels of cheese began appearing on merchant ships, tucked beside barrels of salt and wine. Port towns from Genoa to Bruges buzzed with exchange, and soon, a wheel of hard Alpine cheese might find itself on a table in Constantinople or Cairo. The monks didn't set out to build an industry, they built a legacy. But legacy has a way of slipping into commerce. Pilgrims carried cheese as offerings, nobles demanded it at banquets, soldiers took it as rations. Slowly, quietly, what began as prayer food became profit. You can almost picture it, a dusty caravan on a trade road through the Alps. Inside one wagon, beside silks and spices, lie great golden wheels wrapped in linen. They smell faintly of straw and heaven. The driver doesn't know which monastery they came from, only that wealthy buyers will pay handsomely for that flavor of devotion. By the late Middle Ages, cheese had become a kind of edible currency. Monks traded it for ink, parchment, candles, even the right to maintain their lands. Some abbeys, like those in Switzerland and Burgundy, were known entirely for their cheese production, almost as if God himself had franchised them. And yet, not everyone approved. Some church authorities complained that commerce corrupted purity. Others argued that sharing cheese spread the faith more effectively than sermons. Historians still debate whether monastic trade was a sin of greed or an act of evangelism. But one truth stands firm: cheese was never just food again. In the great fairs of Europe, Champagne, Flanders, Lyon, cheese became a spectacle. Buyers from across the continent haggled over wheels like merchants trading gems. Some cheeses even carried stamped seals from their abbey of origin, early ancestors of today's protected designations. Each seal whispered the same quiet message: this came from patience. You trace that lineage like a map, from Parmigiano Reggiano, born in Benedictine hands, to Comté, ripened under Cistercian watch. Even Gouda and Edam, across the cold North Sea, borrowed the monastic principle of slow aging. The world was learning that stillness could be exported, and of course, where trade goes, imitation follows. By the 15th century, cheese recipes were spreading faster than scripture. Local farmers began making their own versions, tweaking salt ratios, experimenting with rennet from calves or thistles. The humble art of monks became a European language, and like all languages, it changed with every voice that spoke it. It's a little funny, isn't it? The same product once confined to silent cellars was now shouted about in bustling markets. From sacred to secular, from prayer to profit. But that's how most beautiful things evolve, not by staying pure but by adapting, surviving, spreading. Imagine being a monk in those years, watching your craft leave home. Maybe you'd feel proud, or maybe a little heartbroken. You'd walk through the empty cellar and see fewer wheels resting there, fewer candles burning. You'd wonder if holiness could survive the market. But perhaps you'd also smile, realizing that somewhere far away, a sailor or merchant was saying a small grace before biting into your cheese. And in that moment, faith had traveled farther than any sermon could. You can almost hear the ships rocking in harbors now, the smell of tar, salt, and aging cheese mingling in the wind. Every crate carried a story of grasslands, monasteries, and unseen hands. Cheese had become a vessel of memory, crossing frontiers long before passports existed. And when explorers set sail westward, they took it too. Hard cheeses, resilient and rich, survived storms and heat better than most provisions. In some shiplogs, cheese and beer appear as constants, the diet of both pilgrims and pirates. You laugh quietly at the thought, medieval monks accidentally feeding global expansion. The world's first export brand, born from faith and fermentation. It's easy to forget now, in a supermarket aisle lined with tidy plastic wrappers, that each piece of cheese once had a lineage as long as a royal bloodline. It passed from cow to monk to merchant, from merchant to stranger. It carried the scent of different lands, the prayers of hands you'll never know, and maybe that's what makes it so timeless. Because cheese isn't about ingredients, it's about transmission, about what happens when something quiet and handmade enters a noisy world and somehow keeps its soul intact. Even as you drift here, listening, you can almost smell it, a sweetness in the air, like grass after rain. Somewhere a ship leaves port, somewhere a monk counts his last few wheels before dawn, and somewhere in between, faith becomes flavor, and flavor becomes history. By the time cheese circled the world, it was no longer just a monastic secret. It was a map of human patience, cut into wedges, packed into barrels, carried across empires. The monks had taught the world how to wait, and the world in its own chaotic way had learned to crave that stillness. You take a deep breath. The wind is slower now. The sound of waves fades into the hum of the fan in your room. Maybe you're already half asleep, dreaming of ships made of milk and prayer, sailing quietly across time. And if you listen closely, you might still hear the whisper of that first wheel rolling from a monastery door into the waiting hands of the world. You wake to the sound of thunder, not from the sky, but from arguments echoing through Europe. The Reformation has begun, and for the first time in centuries, faith itself is on trial. Monasteries are being dissolved, their lands seized, their libraries emptied. The quiet rhythm of bells and prayers gives way to hammers, sermons, and fire. And in that chaos, the monk's cheese, humble, patient, devoted, suddenly finds itself without a home. You walk through the ruins of an abbey. The air smells of wet stone and smoke. Shelves once lined with aging wheels are now bare. In England, Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries has wiped out hundreds of abbeys. Their fields are parceled out to nobles, their cheese-making tools auctioned off like scrap. Monks who once stirred milk in candlelight now wander in silence, their craft scattered to the winds. And yet, the craft doesn't die. It never does. Some of the monks' apprentices, lay brothers, and local villagers keep the knowledge alive in secret. They carry with them not scripture, but memory. How to measure curds by touch, how to listen to the milk's quiet sigh as it warms, how to know when the wheel has found its heart. In the shadows of reform, cheese becomes an act of quiet resistance, faith made edible. It's strange, you think, how destruction often makes room for reinvention. Without the strict rules of monastic life, cheese begins to evolve more freely. In Protestant lands where monasteries vanish, farmers take over. They adapt recipes to their climate, their markets, their tastes. What was once holy becomes household. And so begins a new chapter, the era of regional cheeses. The monks may be gone, but their influence lingers in every curd. The Dutch perfect Gouda, the Swiss refinemental, the French turn regional terroir into personality. The sacred cellar becomes the family barn. The whisper of prayer becomes the chatter of markets. Cheese loses its robes, but gains its freedom. You can almost hear it, the sound of churns and laughter echoing through farmhouses. The Reformation, for all its fire, has turned cheese from sacred ritual into human tradition. Each farmer becomes a kind of local priest, each cellar a small chapel of flavor. There's something beautifully democratic about it. The sacred has descended into every home, every table. Historians still argue about whether the Reformation saved or destroyed monastic food culture. Some say it liberated it from superstition. Others mourn what was lost, the artistry, the devotion, the sense that time itself was part of the recipe. Maybe both are true. Maybe faith and flavor were never enemies, only two languages describing the same thing. Reverence. You lean closer, tracing the change in the air. The Enlightenment is coming. Science is about to slip into the story. Where monks once spoke of divine mysteries, men in powdered wigs now speak of bacteria and fermentation. The invisible begins to get names: lactobacillus, penicillium, rennet enzymes. The poetry of faith gives way to the precision of chemistry. But don't worry, if the wonder doesn't disappear. It simply changes costume. In 1675, Antony van Leeuwenhoek peers through a microscope and sees tiny creatures swimming in a drop of milk. He doesn't know it yet, but he's looking at the invisible architects of cheese. 2 centuries later, Louis Pasteur will name them, study them, and teach the world how to tame them. The monks might have called it grace. Science calls it culture. But both mean the same thing: transformation. The Enlightenment makes cheese logical, but not less magical. Recipes once guarded by monks become experiments for scientists. Dairies adopt thermometers, salt ratios, sterilization. A new kind of devotion takes root, one built not on prayer but precision. The quiet patience of the monastery lives on, now wearing a white lab coat instead of a brown habit. And yet something subtle shifts. As knowledge grows, mystery fades. Cheese becomes a commodity, predictable, consistent, profitable. The art that once required intuition and faith becomes a formula. You can almost hear the sigh of the monks centuries away, watching their living prayer turned into a checklist. Still you smile, because there's beauty in evolution. Without the Enlightenment, the world would never know how to protect milk from spoilage, or how to share cheese safely across continents. Faith built the foundation, but reason built the bridge. And between the two, the craft survives, sturdy, silent, eternal. As you walk through the flickering light of this new age, you notice something beautiful. Even as monasteries crumble and science rises, both worlds share the same heartbeat, curiosity. The monks once asked what miracles lie hidden in milk. The scientists now ask what microbes make it work. Different questions, same wonder. Maybe that's humanity's oldest habit, to look closer at what seems ordinary and find the infinite inside. Outside, Europe hums with change. Empires rise, colonies expand, railways carve through mountains. Cheese rides those rails, crossing borders faster than ever before. Parmesan, Stilton, Gruyere, all the children of monastic patience, now travel further in a month than the monks did in a lifetime. The world spins faster, but inside each wheel, time still stands still. You run your fingers along the edge of an old cheese mold, now sitting in a museum. Its surface is smooth from centuries of use. Somewhere in its wood grain, you imagine fingerprints, hands that prayed, hands that stirred, hands that tested curds before dawn. The monks are gone, the monastery's silent. But the cheese remembers. And maybe that's the quiet lesson of this chapter. Faith can fall, kingdoms can rise, but patience endures. The monks' world turned to dust, yet their recipe for waiting survived every storm. As you breathe out, the sound of thunder fades, the smell of smoke softens. You feel yourself sinking again, into a gentler rhythm. The Enlightenment may have replaced prayers with formulas, but the story hasn't lost its soul. It's only changed its language, and in the hush before sleep, you can almost hear both worlds speaking together. The monk's whisper and the scientist's pen, blending into a single, timeless refrain: wait, trust, transform. You're standing in the soft hum of the abbey kitchen again, though this time the air feels different, older somehow, heavier with purpose. You watch as a monk carefully presses curds into a wooden mold, his hands sure and practiced, his lips moving silently in prayer. This is not just food anymore. It's become something close to devotion, a spiritual practice bound up in patience, rhythm, and ritual. The scent of milk and salt mingles with candle smoke, and for a fleeting moment, you feel you've stumbled into the beating heart of medieval life itself. The monks believed in the divine order of all things, even bacteria, even mold. To them, cheese was not only sustenance, but a small miracle of transformation. The living made edible, the perishable preserved. You can almost hear Brother Ethelric whispering to himself as he stirs the curdling milk. God moves even through decay. There's something humbling about that idea. That holiness could hide in something as ordinary as a wheel of cheese, and it wasn't only about eating. Cheese became a kind of metaphor for time itself, slow, deliberate, and unbothered by impatience. In a world where clocks didn't yet rule the hours, aging cheese was a way of measuring patience, faith, and the gentle rhythm of work and prayer. Each wheel on the wooden shelf was a silent testament to endurance, but the monasteries didn't keep all of this wonder to themselves. They began to sell their cheese in nearby markets, offering small round blessings wrapped in cloth. Pilgrims bought them as gifts, knights packed them for long rides, and peasants saved them for feast days. Bit by bit, the monks' craft spread beyond the cloister walls. There's a curious irony here. The very vow that kept them isolated, poverty, also made them innovators. Because they couldn't waste food, they learned to extend its life. Because they couldn't eat meat on fasting days, they made cheese richer, firmer, more filling. And because silence was sacred, they worked with a focus few modern chefs could ever match. You can imagine it now. The echo of sandals on stone, the steady churn of wooden paddles in milk, the soft thud of wheels being turned on their racks. There's rhythm in that simplicity. You might even envy it. A life where every sound has meaning, every gesture intention. Still, not all monks agreed on how cheese should be made. Some abbeys argued fiercely over whether rennet, the enzyme taken from a calf's stomach, was too close to meat to be used on fasting days. Others debated how much salt was pious, or whether aging cheese in ale cellars might tempt the monks toward gluttony. It's funny, isn't it? Even men who'd given up earthly desires could still quarrel about flavor. Historians still debate exactly how much of medieval cheese-making was guided by faith and how much by sheer necessity. Some suggest the monks simply followed the milk's natural course, discovering miracles by accident. Others insist it was all deliberate, Centuries of careful observation disguised as devotion. Either way, they left behind more than recipes. They left a rhythm for living, a theology of patience. You glance again at the shelves lined with cheese, each wheel aging quietly in the dimness. There's something deeply human about it, the willingness to wait, to trust unseen processes. In that patience lies the whole medieval soul, faith, labor, and hope wrapped in wax and time. And as the candlelight flickers over the monks' faces, you realize something else. The obsession with cheese wasn't about taste or indulgence. It was about transformation, the belief that the world, even in its most perishable form, could be redeemed through care and stillness. You smile faintly. Maybe you could use a bit of that philosophy in your own life. Less rushing, more ripening. Now outside, a storm gathers beyond the abbey walls. Thunder rumbles like distant drums, but inside the monks keep working unbothered, their faith steady as their craft. You can almost taste the air, warm milk, damp stone, a trace of salt, and as it fills your lungs, the scent feels like peace. The world beyond may be loud, chaotic, fleeting. But here, amid the slow birth of cheese, time itself seems to kneel, and with that thought you breathe a little slower, as if your own restlessness might settle too. The storm outside the abbey has passed by the time you step into the courtyard again. Rainwater glistens on the stones, tiny puddles reflecting the faint light of dawn. You can still smell the faint musk of milk and wood smoke drifting from the kitchens, but now it mingles with the clean scent of wet earth. The world feels washed, as if even the heavens have gone through their own kind of purification. A novice monk rushes past you, his robe damp and clinging, clutching a small wheel of cheese in both hands like a relic. You watch as he disappears into the cellar door beneath a carved archway. The air there must be cool, dense with the perfume of aging cheese, nutty, sharp, almost sweet. You follow him down in your imagination, step by slow step. The stone stairs slick beneath your feet. The cellar is darker than you expect, the only light seeping from a single lantern that swings faintly from a hook. Racks stretch away into the shadows, each shelf stacked with wheels wrapped in cloth marked with symbols, crosses, initials, little drawings of animals or suns. Every mark tells a story: who made it, when it was begun, which abbey it came from. You realize these monks weren't just keeping food, they were keeping memory. Back then, records weren't always written in books. Sometimes they were stored in taste and scent, in the craftsmanship passed from hand to hand. The way a monk pressed curds or salted a wheel became as much a legacy as a manuscript. You can imagine the abbot telling the younger brothers, "Remember, our flavor is our prayer." And yet even the holiest cheese could cause trouble. When some monasteries began to produce cheese for trade, not just sustenance, the church raised its brow. Was it right for holy men to profit from milk? The papal councils debated it. Was commerce itself a sin if done in the name of God? There were whispers of greed, of abbots hoarding gold instead of souls. You can almost hear the tension in the cloisters, quiet voices arguing in Latin over the ethics of butterfat. Still, life has a way of finding its balance. The monks defended their work, saying that cheese sold to feed the poor was no sin, and that labor done humbly was its own prayer. The Pope, ever practical, eventually agreed. And so monastic cheeses spread, first across France and England, then Italy, Flanders, and beyond. Some of the names still echo faintly in your modern fridge: Reblochon, Munster, Fontina. Even the mighty Parmigiano has its roots in monastic patience. You've probably grated a legacy once whispered into being by a silent monk 1,000 years ago. There's a warmth in that thought, how something so ancient can linger in your kitchen, how every bite carries a small ghost of devotion. It's like tasting time itself, ripened and preserved. You notice a peculiar sound now, a soft, rhythmic creak. A monk is turning the cheese wheels on the racks one by one, flipping them like pages of an old book. He hums under his breath, a plainchant, low and steady. The melody vibrates against the stone walls, filling the space with something that feels like heartbeat and prayer at once. It's easy to forget that these men lived mostly in silence. They didn't have screens, podcasts, or chatter. Their world was shaped by cycles of day and night, of milk and curd, of work and rest. In that rhythm, they found a kind of peace we can barely imagine now. You think about your own days, how the minutes slip by, sliced thin by deadlines and noise. Maybe that's what draws you to stories like this one. You're not just learning about monks. You're searching for that quiet pulse they knew, that slow, steady heartbeat beneath all the hurry. Outside, a bell begins to toll, matins maybe, or lauds. The sound rises through the air like a breath drawn deep into the lungs of the world. You feel it in your chest, vibrating through your ribs, through your bones, and for a moment, you can't tell whether you're standing in the 12th century or in your own dimly lit room listening to rain hit the window. It's all the same rhythm, really. The world turning, the milk thickening, the breath slowing. And as the monk moves down the last row of shelves, brushing his fingers lightly over each wheel, you understand the truth at the heart of their obsession. It wasn't just cheese they were perfecting. It was patience. The courage to wait, to trust the slow alchemy of time. You close your eyes. The air is cool, the hum of the abbey steady, and for the first time tonight, you feel something settle deep within you. The night deepens again as you step out of the cellar and back into the quiet corridors. The air feels different now, warmer, touched by candlelight and faint echoes of chanting. Somewhere a door creaks and the long hall breathes. You follow the sound, your footsteps soft against the flagstones, until you reach the cloister garden, where everything smells of rosemary, sage, and the sweet damp of the earth. You pause by a stone bench, its surface cold but smooth, worn down by centuries of meditating bodies. Above you the moon hangs like a pale wheel, round, ripened, aged to perfection. You almost laugh, realizing even the sky tonight looks like cheese. It's in this gentle stillness that the story begins to fold in on itself. You think of all the hands that stirred, strained, and salted through the centuries, anonymous monks who never sought fame or fortune, yet shaped the very taste of Europe. Their devotion fermented not just milk but culture itself. There's something profoundly human in that, isn't there? To take something perishable and fragile and turn it into endurance. To find holiness not in miracles or grand gestures, but in the simple act of waiting day after day for flavor to bloom. As your mind drifts, you imagine one monk, maybe Brother Mathieu, working late in a stone kitchen. The room glows from the embers in the hearth. He stirs the curds with a carved wooden paddle, murmuring a psalm under his breath. The rhythm is meditative, like turning a prayer wheel, each movement a conversation between body and soul. He doesn't know that hundreds of years later, people will still taste his craft. He doesn't know that what he's doing will one day fill shelves, markets, and dinner tables across the world. He's simply present, completely, quietly there. And that's the secret these monks understood. Patience isn't about waiting for something to happen. It's about being at peace while it does. You lean back on the bench, your breath steadying. The soft hum of crickets outside the abbey walls joins the faint drip of water from the eaves. Time moves like honey, slow, golden, viscous. Some historians say cheese kept Europe alive through famines, through war, through plague. Others argue it shaped trade routes and dietary laws. But most of them agree on one thing. It taught people how to preserve not just food, but hope. Even in scarcity, even in silence, there was something quietly alive beneath the rind. It's strange, isn't it? How something so small, milk curdled by accident, could turn into a centuries-long devotion. Maybe that's the lesson these monks left behind, that meaning isn't always found in what we build, but in what we tend, patiently and lovingly. You remember the first wheel you saw in the story, set on that rough wooden table glistening under torchlight. Now as the tale draws to a close, you see it again, only older. Its surface cracked like ancient parchment, its scent deep and nutty. A monk slices it open, and the air fills with warmth, with the faint sweetness of time itself. He offers you a piece. You take it without a word, and as it melts on your tongue, you feel 1,000 years collapse into that single quiet taste. The bells ring again, this time for Compline, the last prayer before rest. The monks file into the chapel, their shadows long, their steps unhurried. One by one, the candles dim, and the chant softens into silence. You stay behind for a while, listening to the final echo fade into the dark. The world outside is still. Only the faint rustle of the wind moves through the herbs. You breathe in. The air smells of time, wax, and a little bit of history, and then slowly you let it all fade. The abbey walls blur. The hum quiets. Your thoughts soften like curds under warm milk. The story dissolves into stillness. There's nothing left to chase now. No more wheels to turn, no prayers to whisper. Just quiet, so you lie back, let your mind rest, And imagine the monks drifting off in their stone cells, peaceful, content, dreaming of tomorrow's milk. Because in the end, that's all they ever wanted, to keep something alive, long enough to share. And that's what you've done too. Tonight, kept their story breathing just a little longer. The light dims completely. The sound fades. Your heartbeat slows to match the rhythm of the rain. The abbey vanishes into the dark. End of script. Sweet dreams.